Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of Angular Air. I'm your host, Justin Schwarzenberger, and today we are going to be talking practical RxJS and performance. We're going to have a bunch of code demos. Should be good. Uh, our panelists today joining us, we've got Austin McDaniel. Austin, what's going on?
How's everybody doing today? Justin, you're looking awful tan from NG Cruise there.
Yes. We just got back from that last week. That was pretty cool. We'll have a little bit of discussion about that here in a minute. Pretty fun trip. And I think we got Mike Brocky's going to be joining us here in a minute. So as soon as he comes on, we'll introduce him. And Alyssa might be joining us as well. So we'll see. Oh, hey, there's Mike. Just in time. Mike, what's going on?
Not too much. Did I make it for my intro?
You totally did. What were you busy doing? You're in a meeting or what?
I was in a meeting. Yeah, man.
All right. Got some business.
These things happen after you get back from a cruise.
Hey, we were just talking about that too. And our guest today.
I wasn't listening.
I know. You're busy connecting. All right. Our guest today is Onur. Onur, how's it going?
Hey, man. What's up?
It's good to have you here. Why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself real quick before we get started, and then we'll dive in and talk about some cruise stuff, and we'll talk about RxJS. But Onur, give us a rundown.
Okay. So I'm Onur. I'm a freelance UI UX engineer based in Vienna. So I live and work in Austria, a small country you may have heard of, possibly. And so I work for European companies and help build them web apps. And lately, I'm more and more focused on the PWA stuff. So trying to bring some improvements on that front.
Awesome. And you're going to be demoing some code today for us for RxJS stuff. We're going to be talking a little bit about that. That'll be pretty cool. Before we dive into that, let's give a recap of cruise. So last week, whole week, we were on a boat. Mike and I, several other people. It was pretty cool. It was neat. It was a different type of conference setting. You know, it was pretty cool. The thing I liked most about it was the fact that it spanned several days. You know, so we had like 3.5 days on the boat. And that was plenty of opportunity to network and get to know people, help people out. Usually at conferences, you got this like 2-day crammed of all kinds of content, and then you're in and you're out, and it's difficult to interface with people and get and reach a lot of people with that. So this setting was pretty cool to have that. And then of course there was the destinations, going to the Nassau and Coco Key, their own private island, and then the Keys. Key West was pretty cool. Mike, what did you think about it?
Oh, it was an absolute blast to just have all of that time to be able to lay on the beach, lay by the pool. Talk about Angular and have some great conversations. Yeah, having that extra time was fantastic. I put all my eggs in one basket. You were there, Justin. The first night, we were up till like 2 in the morning, banging out an issue, playing with some code with Aaron Frost. But it was really good. Had some really good conversations with other speakers as well as all the attendees. It was very relaxed, obviously on a cruise ship, but the conversations were just fantastic.
Yeah, it was definitely pretty cool. It was a little long, but really cool. And one of the things that was interesting was we had like that first day or Tuesday, the full day. I think we had conference stuff going on for most of the day on the boat, and then the following 2 days we didn't start till 2:30, and we did it from like 2:30 to 6 o'clock would be the conference stuff. So you'd have a chance to get off on the boat. And I don't know, this was my first cruise, so I don't know if all the cruises work this way, but basically every night we'd be traveling, and then we'd end in port somewhere, and so that next day you'd have the whole day at wherever we stopped at. And so we would have the morning until about 2 o'clock to get back on the boat for the conference. And that was cool, but I think maybe it would have been better if we had like the conference stuff at night, so you could have the whole day at wherever our destination was and then come back and do the conference stuff at night. But I don't know. What do you think?
What was your favorite destination, guys?
Mine was it's a toss-up between Coco Key, which was their Royal Caribbean's island they had. It was really cool. Just the island, we got out, we had to do some snorkeling, we did some swimming. But it was a little touristy. I mean, the setup of the stuff on the island was a little touristy, so I would have liked it to been a little more raw. But that was really cool. And then Key West was awesome. Walking around Key West, seeing all the old historic buildings, all the palm trees everywhere. It was pretty cool. What about you, Mike?
I'd have to say Key West, and I may be a little bit slighted because I got sunburnt pretty good at Coco Key. And I'm finally getting over that now. But yeah, Key West was just a lot of fun, even though it was really hot, really humid, walking around downtown in Key West, but it was a nice place. Never been there either. So all new destinations for me, at least.
Something you don't hear very much. I got sunburned at a code conference.
I had my brightness on my laptop up way too high. It got burnt.
Yeah, totally. And then it was really cool because, smaller set of attendees. So everybody really got to network with each other, speakers and attendees. And then we had a hack night, a couple hack nights. And yeah, it was just really cool to be able to hang out, talk Angular, meet people, and just be in that space and kind of live in this tropical paradise at the same time, be all development in Angular and just kind of chill. It was pretty cool. So yeah, I don't know if they'll do it next year or whatnot, but if they do, work on getting away on that boat because it's pretty cool. All right.
So, I have a question.
Yes.
Will there be any videos online about NG Cruise, presentations and stuff?
My understand everything was recorded and will be published. I don't have a timeline for you, but keep an eye out. I'll definitely be tweeting out about mine.
Cool.
And yeah, I'm sure they'll be hitting the airwaves in the next few weeks.
Yeah,
cool.
This Media recorded everything. They were there doing the whole media stuff. So I believe they're going to edit all that stuff together, and then they'll make it available. So it'll be cool. Be on the lookout for that.
Yeah.
As well as Angular Air content, we were able to have a few chats as the Angular Air panel with some of the speakers, as well as just ourselves.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. I don't know if I missed that, but so we did like 3 things that were recorded. So we didn't have an episode obviously last week, but we had 3 sessions where we did these discussion panels, and one of them was really, really good. So we'll throw those up through our channel here as soon as we get those from this .media. So that was cool.
Okay, cool.
All right, and while on the boat, I finally got my RxJS stickers, so I'm stoked on that. I only grabbed these 2, so normally I grab a bunch and then I'll send them out to people, but I didn't get more. But maybe I can reach out to Ben Lesh and get some more if people want them. But RxJS, let's get into it. Onur, why don't you get us started here?
Okay, so I definitely want a sticker too from Ben Lesh.
Okay, so real quick, since you came on and you're making the time to come on the show and talk to us and show everybody and share your content, I'm going to get you one of these. So if you need one, I'm going to send it on your way. So yeah, okay.
Great.
All right.
Okay, so you told me that you had also interesting discussions on RxJS on NG Cruise, so maybe we will also get into details about your discussions. I thought about this show, and I planned basically 2 parts. In the first part, I'd like to just repeat some RxJS basics and talk about the basic concepts and get a common sense on the terminology, because I have the feeling that people get really confused with the terminology and with the concept, and then they frustrated quite fast. So maybe, we just repeat the basics. And in the second part, I thought that we could do a case study on reactive component I've published in April. So it's a more complex Angular component where a lot of RxJS features are used. So about 20 operators. You have hot and cold observables and all that good stuff. So maybe it's also a good learning resource because every time when I'm learning and I get to the limits of the documentation, I have to find projects and get into the code and get my hands dirty. So yeah, basically 2 parts. Okay.
Awesome. That sounds like it's going to be pretty cool. I'm excited about this terminology description because that's one thing that I find challenging is there's all these terms for these operators and the observables and subjects and behaviors and all these things, and it's kind of okay. How do I remember and get that to sink in, like which one is which? Because I don't know. So be interesting.
Well, when I started learning, I tried to focus on just the most important parts. So you don't have to know everything, but if you just remember the most important concepts, that's kind of a key idea for me. Okay, so let me try to get into the desktop sharing mode. Just give me a okay if it's working. You should see a code editor and on the right side a console.
Looks great.
Looks good.
Looks good? Okay.
Yep.
Fine. So RxJS, everybody knows about RxJS. It's a very cool library to get along with async problems using observable sequences. So the idea is from, I don't know, 2010, I think. So in front-end terms, this is quite old stuff, but it's getting hotter and hotter. So. And for me, the cool thing was when I started to learn about observable sequences to learn about how observables fit into the general landscape. And I learned that it's about consumers and producers of data. So on most general conception, you have consumers and producers of data. And of course, there you can have different kind of communication or protocol between these 2 entities. And when I read the official documentation, there was this cool description of pull versus push systems. And this helped me really to understand the role of observables in the general landscape. So before getting into the interface definitions or type definitions, I just want to remind everybody about the general idea of consumers and producers. So you can partition the systems in 2 parts. Let's start with the pull systems. So if you have a function definition, the function body does nothing for itself. It's just a lazy definition of some computation. And here we have a very simple example where the consumer is in an active role and calls the producer, and the producer then hands over the value, and the value is used. So let's see if that works. Yeah. And so a function can be regarded as a producer for single value in a synchronous way. Then you can also have pull systems where multiple values are returned. In this case, I will comment out that code. So in JavaScript, you can define generators, and generators are special kind of functions, if you will, which are allowed to yield multiple values and also close it with a return statement. And here
you do that with the asterisk right there, right? For the generator?
Yeah. So basically the syntax is you have an asterisk on the function keyword, and that declares marks that as a generator. And it works really simple. You have the yield keyword, and the yield keyword can return basically value. And what happens if we call a generator? So if we invoke the generator, we get back an iterator. So again, we're in a pull system. The consumer has to actively pull out values out of the generator. So you have to call next every time you want to get the next value. So, okay, that was pull systems for single and multiple values. And then you can, of course, have push-based systems. And this is, of course, very familiar in front-end programming or in back-end programming, the concept of a promise. So with a promise, the roles of the consumer and producer are slightly changed, or changed totally. The consumer has a passive role. You provide a callback where you get the values pushed to. So the producer has to actively produce the value, and the consumer will receive it when it's available. So it has a passive role now. And yeah, with JavaScript promises, basically you use the resolve function method to return a future value. And if you want to consume the value out of the promise, you have to provide a callback. So this is the success callback. There will be a future value, and you will get the value when it's available, or you might not get the value, or there could be an error. So as a consumer, you're in a passive role. Okay, and now we get to the interesting part. So everybody still with me?
Yes, we're still with you.
Okay. And observables have the role of returning multiple values synchronous or asynchronously. So it's a push-based system. You define an observable, or you create an observable, and then you subscribe to the observable, and it will push you values over time. So that can be synchronous or async. And here we have a simple example how to define an observable in RxJS. And now we can start to talk a little bit about the interfaces we have here. So here we see that we create an observable by passing a function which takes an observer. And just by looking at the definition, you see that the observer must have next method defined on it, and also a complete method. So already we know a lot about the type definition. The observable basically has to provide a subscribe method. And when you subscribe to an observable, you pass in an observer, and then the values get pushed to you. So here we have two values, sync, and with set timeout, we get the latest value. Okay. So this is more or less following the official documentation. And another thing I found very interesting was that you can regard observables as generalizations of functions. So if we look at the simple function definition again, we can use the call method on the function prototype just to make it more similar to how you would call observables. So producer.call looks really similar to observable.subscribe. And as a matter of fact, you can say that observables are more general than functions. So, okay, you are limited that you take 0 arguments, but an observable basically allows to return multiple values, and the function just allows to return one value. So also this idea was kind of interesting to understand for me at the beginning. Okay, any questions about that for now? Or
This looks great.
okay.
As I'm looking at this, as you're talking, it almost feels like a iterator and a promise had a baby, and that was an observable. Because in the iterator, you're yielding out, and then you're peaking at the next one.
Yeah.
And you're completing it, and that's kind of like the promise. Maybe that's not the correct way to say it, but it kind of resembles both of those concepts kind of meshed together.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's some background on that the observable structure is actually so it's based on the iterable structure, but slightly turned around. So I think there was an NG Air show with Ben Lash, so he had more to explain about what is the background regarding design patterns and stuff like that. But yeah, I don't want to dive too much into that, because I think a lot of confusion starts to happen. So
yeah, absolutely. I was just making the observation as you were talking through it.
Okay, yeah. So for me, it was just interesting observation that this is so similar, and observables are actually more general, with the limitation that you have 0 arguments to the function. So that was a more interesting part of the documentation. And yeah, then beside the definitions on the types, observables also follow a certain grammar or contract, if you will. So the next, error, and complete methods, which are defined on the observer, have to follow a certain contract. So with this definition, you state that there may be multiple or 0 next calls, and optionally an error call or a complete call. So if we just draw some simple marble diagrams, this n denotes a value or a next call. So it's valid that you can have multiple next calls and then an error. Also, it's valid that you can have multiple next calls and then the observable completes. Or, if I'm not mistaken, it's also valid that nothing happens. No next is called, and also the observable does not complete. So, I don't know, contract-wise, this should be valid.
Yeah. So think of it as the idea of have an observable of click events, and the user just sits there and stares at the screen and never clicks anything.
Yeah, perfect example. And of course, there are stuff you're not allowed to do. So in the contract, you're not allowed to push an error and then a value or a complete message over time. So this invalidates the contract. So this is not provided by the type system itself. It's provided by the reference implementation, and you have to, as a library programmer, you have to watch out that this contract is always valid. Also, you can't have next values after the observable completes, or you can't have multiple errors there's just one error and that's it. Okay.
So if you have an error, do you have to complete it after the error? Is that kind of, they go hand in hand, or does the error complete it?
I would say that the error completes, because it's either error or complete. It's not error and complete, so it's either error or complete, optional.
Cool.
Okay.
And so this is really for, like, if we're creating our own observables, right?
Yeah. Also as a consumer of RxJS, you have to know the contract so that you have a basic sense of how the observable works. So that's a good thing to know. Okay. Yeah, here basically I have a comment on the observer. The observer holds just a set of free callbacks, or may also be defined partially, but I will get to the observer in more detail later. Let's have a look at another core type, which is the subscription. And the subscription is basically a handle on the execution, because you can have observables going on infinitely long, and at some point you want to unsubscribe from them. So observable interval is not a function. Did I comment out something wrong? Yeah. Let's see.
I think it's a lowercase o on the import.
Oh no, it works. I just commented out an import. Okay, so when do we get a subscription? If we call the method subscribe on the observable, we get back the subscription. And basically the subscription has just a method unsubscribe, where you indicate that the resources can be freed. And let's say you want to write your own observable. We also have to specify the add-on logic if necessary. So we define the observable via the constructor and takes the subscribe method. And basically at the end, the unsubscribe method is returned. And there you can, well, here we have just a set interval with 2 seconds, and it just pushes turtles over time. And if I increase here, we should see the numbers going up. Yeah, and after 5.5 seconds, it will unsubscribe. So we have 2 times the turtle in this time frame, and the interval is cleared.
So I think this is one of the parts where it gets a little bit confusing, is once you're creating a new observable and you're handing it a function, and then inside of that function is where you're doing some next and some finish and stuff like that, complete and stuff. And so I don't know, how do you keep track as you start creating an observable? Is that just the API, the life of the API? That's how we're going to have to deal with it and start learning it, or is there a trick to kind of, I don't know, conceptually wrap your brain around that? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, basically the 2 things you have to remember when creating an observable is that you will get past an observer. And the observer is really simple type. So it's just the 3 methods on an observer, next or error or complete. So that's one thing you have to remember. And the second thing you have to remember is that if you allocate some resource that must be freed after unsubscribe, you have to return unsubscribe handler, which is later called on the subscription, which frees the resources. So that's two things you have to remember. But I think you really have to get your hands dirty and create your own nonsensical observables, maybe turtles or whatever. It really helps if you play around with it. And yeah, so
do you have to return a function that doesn't unsubscribe, or will it presume just a default unsubscribe?
I think you don't have to return an unsubscribe. Here we had an example where we just used the observer and didn't care about the teardown logic, because this is a very simple observable and there is nothing to, no resource to free up. So I think it will do nothing, no op.
I think it's important though. Even though you don't have to return that function to unsubscribe, in this example here, you're doing a clear interval, you still need to unsubscribe to your function, even if you don't return a function. That way you can free up, that way you're not listening for memory leaks with event handlers.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to unsubscribe from the observable, so that's what you're saying basically, right?
Correct. And even if you don't return the function, you still need to call it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I think Ben Lash has a very good blog post on that, where he tries to address the problem of managing your own subscriptions versus using operators like take until and stuff like that to automatically unsubscribe when the observable is finished. So I think you don't always have to manage the subscription manually. Sometimes you can use operators, but I think we will come to operators later.
Oh, good point. I forgot about take and tell, and some of those operators that you use when you're creating these observables handle that for you. So
yeah,
that's a good tip as well.
Yeah, so it's not my tip, it's Ben Lash's tip. Just learn by reading the blog post of Ben. So I think it's on Medium, and yeah, he has a lot of good posts. Okay, so are there any comments or other questions for this stuff? I
think we're good.
I'm a little sad you used turtles instead of pandas.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't think a lot about that, but you're right.
Important detail.
Now I like turtles, so I'm okay with it.
Yeah. Should I change it on air right now? Give you the honor. Maybe let me try.
Some live coding.
Yeah. What can go wrong? So animal and panda. Right. So I guess 3 times.
That's a lot of panda.
So you have to.
We could all use more pandas in our life.
Yeah. It's also a critical part of RxJS to understand the panda mind.
Nice.
Okay. So let's try to continue a little bit. Okay, so the next point or the next core type is the observer. I also mentioned some a little bit about observers, but basically you have to know that the observer may be passed as an object with the methods on it. It may be partially specified. So often you're just interested in the next values and just provide the next handler. And also you can pass it as arguments to the subscribe function. So either an object, partially implementing the interface. So at least the next method would be interesting, or you provide the next callback and the error callback as arguments to the subscribe function. So that's how the observer basically is used on the observer.
So what would be the use case for us to create our own observer?
You mean an observable? Or an observer?
Like the observer object that you created, that you just commented out, right?
Yeah. You have to create an observer object. Otherwise, RxJS is lazy. Nothing will happen. So you need to subscribe with an observer to get things started. Otherwise, nothing will happen. If you don't call subscribe, where you have to pass an observer, nothing will happen. So you can define observables and chain observable methods as you want. As soon as there is a subscribe call, the thing will start to execute. So this is the lazy part of RxJS.
Cool.
If I do next before I subscribe to something, does it pick up like a queue, or will it only be from everything on from when I subscribe?
Yeah. Okay. Now we're getting to the really confusing part. Actually, that's a hint for the next topic. So basically, there are two cases. Until now, I've just talked about observables, and observables have always a separate context, execution context. So if we get back to the Panda definition here of the observable, you call next inside the definition of the observable. And as soon as you subscribe, you will get all values from beginning to the end. So every time you subscribe on that observable, it will get a new execution context, which is separated from all other subscriptions, and it will get all values from the beginning to the end. And now we get to your point. And that's basically the topic of subjects. So subjects, yeah, there are a lot of blog posts about subjects, and also a lot of confusing stuff going on. And without getting into too much detail about subject, I want to start with a motivation why we need something like a subject. So let's say you have an observable, and the observable has a producer of data which does some heavy computation, or let's say it allocates some very costful resource. And then you have then you subscribe 2 times. What happens here is that each subscription will get its own execution context, and the heavy computation, as you see on the right side, gets called 2 times. So if you just have the observable as we used it for now, this is a problem. So you have to get rid of this, because there are cases where you want to share the context or share some common resource. And that's basically the reason why we need the concept of a subject. Okay, so everybody still with me?
Yes, yes, that's a really good description.
Everybody sleeping? Okay. And so the subject is a very interesting type definition, if you want. So it has really two parts. You can view the subject as an observable. So just like the usual observable we were talking about right now. So you can call subscribe on a subject, as it's just like an observable. And it also has the side of an observer. So what was an observer? The observer type provided was just the set of 3 callbacks. So you had the next callback, error callback, and the complete callback. So the subject is a type which just combines the observer and the observable. And it's basically used to solve the problem of sharing a common execution context, because you cannot always afford to have a very pure, perfect, separated context route. So therefore, you need to have a subject. So how can we use subjects? And the funny thing is you can use subjects on a lot of different ways. Let's see what I have here. Yes. Okay. So of course we get hold on the subject type by importing the subject type from RxJS, and then we create a subject, and here we use the observer part of the subject and push 2 values, and then we use the observable part of the subject and more or less subscribe 2 times. And then we use again the observer part to push two values, and yeah. So what we have here? Okay. So the first thing to notice is the values, the first 2 values, they are not outputted in the console, because yeah, you have a hot observable here, and the subscription is basically too late to the party, and it subscribes after the next call and does not get hold of the first 2 values, but it will get the next 2 values. And so that basically partially answers your command, Austin, right? So this is a case where you have a hot observable where the 2 values are lost. If you would have cold observables, you would receive all values.
Oh, real quick, you mentioned the hot and cold observables. You want to describe that real quick for the viewers?
Yeah. Okay. So basically, if you work with the default observable, as in the beginning, where you have a separated execution context, and each subscribe triggers the execution context, you have cold observables, and every value or every subscribe starts a new execution context, and you get all the values that are emitted. And with hot observables, you have some kind of an event emitter stuff in the background. So subject is in this case similar to an event emitter. And if you emit these two values before any subscription exists, these two values will be lost. So if you register a click callback on a button and the user clicks the button before the listeners are added, you will not notice, take note of the clicks before registration. So that's, for me, I don't know if this is a good example, because with cold and hot, it gets really complicated pretty fast, and you end up having lukewarm observables. But for now, I just like to focus on the pure observables with a separated execution context and subject with shared execution context. So a subject basically may maintain a list of observers and push the same value out to all the observers.
Kind of makes sense. But hey,
Okay.
you brought it up, so I wanted to
yeah.
make sure and describe it to everyone.
Yeah, you're right. Okay, so here we have the example where we get rid of the heavy computation 2 times using a subject. So just to quickly comment on that, you have the observable, and then you create a subject, and you subscribe 2 times on the subject, and you use the observer part of the subject to subscribe on the observable, so that you can avoid a separate context execution. So that's the trick. So that's a performance trick, basically. So if you're a consumer of RxJS and you have performance issues, you might want to look into your observables, whether you have a separate execution context that are not needed and taking up a lot of computation. Okay.
Okay, can you uncomment that real quick and one more time?
Yeah.
On that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you've got a subject that you've created and subscribed to, and then you've also created an observable that you're subscribing to and handing it the subject, which could be an observer or observable, right?
Yeah.
And you're doing this.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm subscribing on the subject. So the subject maintains a list of observers, and I'm using the subject to subscribe on the observable. And if the observable emits a value, the subject will be used to multicast, basically, the values to the observers without needing to create another execution context or a separate execution context.
Okay, got it. Takes a minute for that to sink in, right? But it's really cool.
Yeah,
it's kind of like, okay, whoa, let's sink that in.
Yeah,
cool.
And so this is not just for fun or stuff like that. You need subjects, otherwise performance will be very, very bad. So you need it performance-wise. Okay, so we're running out of time terribly.
You left something up there, or uncommented.
Yeah, thanks. So as I said, you can have different ways to use multicasted observables. So the default observable is unicast, and subjects, or you can create multicast observables. And yeah, there's we have, again, the really simple observable definition, and we create a subject, and we use the multicast operator where we pass the subject. And then we get a different kind of observable, more special observable. It's called connectable observable, if I'm not mistaken. And this observable just adds the method connect. So if you subscribe on the multicast connectable observable, it will call subscribe on the subject. And if you call connect, it will call subscribe on the observable itself. So this is another way how to use subjects in RxJS. And yeah, you want to add something to this?
No, I think I'm good.
Otherwise, I will just shortly mention the concept of reference counting. So we often have the case that you want to create a multicast observable on the first subscription, and if the last subscription unsubscribes, you have to clean up the subject, and there you have the ref count operator. So I will not get too much into ref counting because we're running out of time. So, but it's basically nothing new. You can look this up in the official documentation. I think the official documentation is still one of the best resources besides all the great blog posts. Okay, and I'll skip also schedulers. And the next topic would be operators. So basically, this would be the topic to talk about in the second part.
Did you want to get into your case study?
Yeah,
we could do that. Let's
okay.
do that. Yeah.
Okay.
And then everybody can kind of look up stuff on the scheduler and operators online, and yeah.
Okay, so we ran out of time terribly. I'm sorry. I'm doing this for the first time, so it's very hard to estimate how much time it will take to get through this stuff.
No worries. There's plenty of good content. We really appreciate it, and we can go over. That's fine.
Okay.
People have to, Mike has to go back to another meeting, something.
Yeah.
As long as you're available, let's keep some stuff going. So go for it.
Yeah, I don't want to keep Mike away from his CLI work. So just a quick hint on the component I've released in April, end of April. It's really, I'd say, more complex Angular component where you have basically virtualization of a list or a grid, and for UI implementations where you have cells given with a certain height, you can optimize the scrolling behavior. So the basic idea here is to just maintain a constant amount of DOM nodes and not render the whole list. So the list is really big. But if we just show the necessary stuff, yeah, it kind of works good. And the idea for this component was for me to, I wanted to use RxJS for the inner implementation, but also for the API surface, because one of the greatest parts of Angular is that that RxJS is built in many places. So this will be maybe another show, but I just wanted to follow the same idea and try to use RxJS where it fits naturally. And in UI components, you often have the case that you can really get benefit out of RxJS operators, which we did not capture in this show. But Yeah, you can look this up on GitHub. It's Denoni/od-virtual scroll. It's really not that much code. You'll find examples of about 20 operators, and in a few hundred lines of code, you basically get an idea of how RxJS can be integrated in components. Because I often feel that RxJS is used in Angular, and when it comes to components that people implement, they break with the idea and they don't use RxJS. So in some cases it's okay, but often it fits naturally, and yeah, that was the idea behind the component. But I will stop talking now and give back to you, Justin.
All right. Well, that was really cool. I think you did a good job of breaking that stuff down, really kind of identifying, giving us a way to learn that stuff more. It's certainly confusing, right, with all these different terminology and names, and then you go deeper and deeper and start wrapping things around. It's like, oh man. One of the things I think that I found is like you kind of got to spend a lot of time with it, right? And you were mentioning this before, like you got to dive in and show some turtles or pandas or whatnot, right?
Yeah.
But like it's hard to kind of get in there and you figure it out and you write some code and you're cool. Then you got to go jump and do something else. You don't use RxJS for a little bit and you come back to it and you're like, oh man, I got to ramp back up again. Like how do you get that to stick? And I think another good point that you made right there at the end was, thinking about using it in your components and things like that. I mean, making it more of a regular thing that you do, which then will help that set in more. And it is something that I think that as you do it, it starts to sink in, and once you do more examples, you can learn it. Anybody can learn it, right? You just got to spend some time with it.
Yeah.
But to that point about getting it to sink in, if you take the time and go through observables, subjects, and the different things you were showing today, as you get deeper and kind of understand what's happening a little bit under the hood, it will help it stick later on when you go and try and consume something from, say, HTTP or a different event within your UI, that you kind of understand, all right, this is how that's being surfaced to me. And then I know that how I can work with it by trying to remember the different operators, which is a completely different conversation. But understand the concept of observables is fundamental.
Yeah.
And Onur, I think one thing that's cool about this, I'm excited that we have this content that you provided this, is that, I've read several articles and even the documentation on the site, and they're all kind of different ways of describing it. And I think you brought a different take to it that helps even more. And so now a compilation of those docs, those blog posts, this recording, all coming together really helps understand it as well. Because there's some things that you described there that I really like the way that you illustrated it, and I think it just thought new light of how to approach it.
Okay, thanks.
Very cool. All right, let's get to our picks and then we'll call it good. We'll start out. Mike, you got a pick?
Yeah, I just muted myself. Yes, I have one pick. So I have 2 daughters, and obviously I really, really enjoy doing what I do. So I wanted to figure out a way to introduce them into development. And a buddy of mine teaches Scratch, or has taught Scratch. So my pick is Scratch, which is almost like a visual development language, which I need to explore more myself as I get them involved with it. But just a way to get kids into programming and understand the different logic mechanisms you can use. So
nice. All right, Austin, I think his pick's going to be like how you clone yourself in Google Hangouts. I don't know how we got 2 of them, but we got a pick. You got any picks?
Yeah, it kicked me off. It was really weird. I am going to pick the project that he just showed, the OD Virtual Scroll. After you showed that, I got really interested, and I started going through it, and I'm like, this is pretty cool. So that's going to be my pick. It's there's a lot in there, and I'm particularly interested. I've done virtual scroll implementations before, so I was particularly interested in that.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Yeah, that's definitely a good pick. I like that pick. All right, I got 2. My first one is the RxJS operators choose your own adventure documentation at the bottom of the page on the main documentation site, reactivex.io/RxJS. It's like a choose your own adventure. I don't know if anybody remembers those books, but if you have an operator, you go here and you just say, okay, well, this is what I need to do. And now you can start like radio picking. I need to do this. I need to do that and this and this. And it'll then tell you which operator you want to use for that scenario. So I like that a lot. It's pretty cool. And then my second pick is The Dark Crystal. I don't know if anybody is familiar with that movie. Jim Henson stuff, really cool. But there's a new one, Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, coming out on Netflix. Netflix has all kinds of content now, but that's in the works. So looking forward to that as a Dark Crystal fan. So those are my two picks. Onur, you got anything?
Yeah, I have something different, not really related to RxJS, but related to PWAs. And it's basically the presentation of Eddie Osmani at Google I/O, so this year's event. And I think it's called PWAs with JavaScript frameworks. And yeah, I think it's really a good presentation and a really good presentation on comparison of the different JavaScript frameworks. And that's basically a big topic I'm learning currently. So yeah, definitely watch that on YouTube. Sure you find it.
Yes, that's a very good one too. Very good one too. All right. Well, we got a bunch of really good shows coming up here in the future. Next week, we're going to be doing it on Thursday instead of Tuesday. But we're going to do ngdoc.io. We have a show coming up on I18N and translation. We got NG Girls and NG Atlanta, debugging with the CLI and VS Code, components as a service, VR and WebGL, and even Flex Layout. So a lot of good stuff lined up for the coming weeks, so make sure you tune in. Thanks, Onur, for joining us today. Really appreciate you sharing your time and going through this stuff. Really good. And welcome back anytime. All right, everyone, have a good one. See you next week. Later.